So the topic which I'm going to speak is on the side of the user, which is like an FMCG. We as packaging technologists, we design something. Obviously, we have been speaking about what design includes since morning. But how does that design finally interface with the packaging machinery? And if it doesn't interface well and run well on the packaging machines, we might end up having something which is actually not retail ready, which might have some. So I have some case studies which I will cover up. So there are 4 aspects we will be covering. One is the approach which we take as a process in every project. That is something which I'll cover in an overview. A couple of case studies where we can show, we'll show that what can go wrong if due diligence is not done right at an early stage. The outcomes of any successful project, old versus new, and obviously explain what led to the success of that project, and best practices which we follow across the globe, and how do we adapt those best practices for India, because it's a very different market compared to a developed nation. So we go to the next slide. So this slide gives an overview and the approach which we as the brand owners, etc., take within an FMCG organization or any company which is having a brand. So what is done is the core theme behind any project is aligning on the key action standards at a very early stage. Now these action standards are arrived by engaging most of the stakeholders like the designers, the printers, in fact to some extent the manufacturers of the manufacturers, like the resin manufacturers. The inputs are taken at a very early stage and they are built into those action standards. The examples will come in following slides. I'll take some examples from those. So what is important is how do we do the right interventions to make a project land right first time and actually make it a successful retail ready pack. So engaging upfront and setting a right action standing is something which we give a lot of due diligence to initially at any project when it is started, because then that sets the context right and we end up having the project almost 95% plus accuracy at the end. And obviously once an action standard is set up, assessing it very frequently, doing a risk mitigation program around it, and having a program how do we mitigate those risks as we go over the development programs. And that has been covered over today by different speakers in the discussion. And why is a packaging development team member important in this whole link up? Because one packaging development guy who is within an organization understands the back end of the process, which is he interfaces with the converters, the printing, ink manufacturers, the adhesives, all the guys who are associated in the back end, and he also understands the requirements of the front end. So he is a very important person who can influence the guys inside. Guys, we need to give these guys briefs very much in advance, because if we don't do that, they will not be ready to give us product solutions which are apt for our products going forward. So that's why this, just to give a holistic approach on the process. Now I will take you through one of the project which was done on a malted food drink pack refresh. The product name is very evident over here. It's Bonvita. On left hand side you can see a container which was the old container and we evolved onto the right hand side container. Now this was done recently around 1.5 years back. The key success attributes which we arrived at was we ended up saving some cost from the packaging and we fed that cost into the product to give a better nutrient bundle to the consumer. So that was something where we started with. How we saved the cost is something will come in the future in the further slides. Obviously we saved costs, so it is a sustainability angle to it, and then obviously there is some consumption which has got reduced and some complexities got reduced across the operations and the distributions. Now the coming 2 slides will give an idea on what can go wrong and how it was mitigated well in advance with the process. So it's a simple manufacturing line wherein the jar just come into the turret, which is just before the filling station. If the positioning of the turret is not right, what can lead to is the 2 photographs on the right hand side. Is that you can have the branded sleeves which were designed, the artworks were adapted in a right manner, And even if you adapt the artworks, you can have a sleeve which is actually damaged by the packaging machine if the turrets are not designed correctly. So this is something which we as guys within the system understand the process and try to influence and get it right up front. So what are the levers which we have is that we try to influence the contact points which are more robust. Rather than having a touch point in the contour area, we have a touch point in an area which is more flat. The finish of the turret is something which we influence with the guys who are within our influence and tell them that, guys, this is something which we need to have because it is going to be in touch with the polymer film and not something which is metal again. So that's something which those guys don't understand who make these plates. Obviously, the process capabilities of jar making has to be taken into consideration. If the diameter is not within the range, we will have obviously inevitably have a sleeve which is torn. And the controls on the jar diameter obviously at our jar manufacturer's end. Second point is again at the same station, because this is the heart of this operation. If there are 2-3 things which are happening over here. One is the jar comes and moves under the filling station, and there are 3 or 4 activities which happen. One, the jar is aligned exactly at a point where the product is filled into the container. Now there is something called as an auger, which is a device which is designed in a manner that it fits snugly, it fits properly with the neck of the jar. If that is not designed properly and the vacuum suction is not designed properly, we'll have product which will be spilled across the neck and we'll have issues in the line going further. So what are the controls set over here in order to, and what are the design criteria which are already built up front? One is the machine change parts or the auger design which is done in discussion with it's done with the operations engineer, because there is a certain speed which these guys expect from these machines. You cannot have a diameter which is 50 millimeter and an auger which is like 60 millimeter. Obviously there's going to be it's a recipe for disaster. So that's one guy. And this same input has to go to the guys who is designing this jar. The agency which was involved in this case was based in London. So they did not have a clue about what our packaging operations look like. So you have to give these upfront in the brief that the diameter of the jar cannot be less than this, because so if it's lesser than that, we will be having dust across in the operations. So there are some controls which have been mentioned over here, I think, to avoid the product on the jar neck, body and the lip. I think most of them are covered, except for the vibration mechanism which is kept just at the point of sealing. So this is what was done in terms of how it was delivered. So I think I'll move forward and I'll cover the next. So I think this is already covered on the panel misalignment, which is a most common aspect which happens in most of the packaging operations. And lastly, on the best practices, in order to get a consistent product or a packaging format out, there are certain set of best practices which are set globally across within the company. These are adapted for each and every product. So these are best practices set around the cutting knives, what kind of design are required. It depends upon the product and the brand requirements. And sorry? Okay. End and fin sealing jaws, obviously there are some photographs shown over there. And there are some parameters, cold seal pattern specifically related to the chocolates. And the kind of panel positioning and cutoffs and the kind of roller jaws which are required. There are some set SOPs and best practices set around those which we have. That's it. That's what I want to cover with you guys.